A sanitizer is a chemical that, if used at the proper concentration, will kill microorganisms or reduce their numbers to a non-harmful level. Sanitizers are used in several ways related to fresh produce. They may be used in water that comes into contact with fruits or vegetables at or after harvest, or they may be part of a multi-step process of cleaning and sanitizing that reduces the level of pathogens on food contact surfaces to acceptable levels. In the United States, sanitizers are regulated at the federal level by the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, as antimicrobial pesticides. There is an approval process which is involved and exhaustive, and the result is an approved label. The label governs the correct use of the sanitizer. It also, if label directions are followed, limits the product's risk to humans, wildlife, and the environment. An approved label, an approved EPA label, includes an EPA registration number. And the EPA also reviews any statements that are made on the product label. There may be additional regulation at the state level. Again, many states regulate pesticides, and this regulation may vary from state to state. It's important for people who plan to use sanitizers to consult their state agency that regulates pesticide use. If a person is going to be using a product as a sanitizer that does not have an EPA label, the user should be prepared to prove that that product is suitable for the intended use. The choice of a sanitizer is based on several considerations. First of all, of course, safety for the people who will be using the sanitizer and for the environment, but also whether or not that particular sanitizer is corrosive, how it might interact with the surfaces on which it's going to be used, and also the characteristics of the sanitizer relative to things such as water pH and temperature. The commonly used sanitizers for food contact surfaces and for water use during harvest and post-harvest activities are first of all based upon chlorine. The first label here is an example of a product that is based upon chlorine. Another group of sanitizers that are frequently used are based upon quaternary ammonium compounds. A third group is based upon peroxyacetic acid. And then occasionally we have sanitizers that might have more than one active ingredient, in this case peroxyacetic acid and hydrogen peroxide. All sanitizers that are approved for use by the Environmental Protection Agency will have a label. The antimicrobial product label will describe the approved uses, such as for water or for food contact surfaces, as well as approved concentrations or dosages. The first thing to look for on the label is the name of the product. In this case, it's Peroxyxtreme. Then take a look at what the active ingredient is. In this case, it's a combination of hydrogen peroxide and peroxyacetic acid. The next thing to look for is the EPA registration number. All labels that are approved by the Environmental Protection Agency will have a registration number. Other material that will be on the label will talk about things such as hazards to humans and domestic animals, the proper storage and disposal of the product or the container, but very importantly, there'll be information on how to safely use the product. Again, directions for uses. In this case, we're considering using this particular sanitizer for hard, non-porous food contact surfaces, as we see down here. And we will definitely read through that section to understand how to use it. The information on the concentration is right here. And what's particularly important is information on which microorganisms this particular sanitizer will control. And we see down here in this section that it will control Staphylococcus aureus, Escherichia coli, Listeria monocytogenes, and Salmonella typhimurium. There are several types of PPE, or personal protective equipment, that those using sanitizer should have on hand. First of all, it's a common practice, as guided by the label, when using the diluted product to have a long sleeve shirt and long pants on. If using the undiluted product, which of course is a more dangerous situation, the PPE requirements will be more stringent. There may be a requirement for coveralls that would be placed over the long sleeve shirt and the long pants. Here's an example of a pair of coveralls. There may also be a requirement to wear chemical-resistant gloves, as we see here. The third requirement may be the use of rubber boots or other non-absorbent footwear. And finally, it's very important to protect the face and the eyes when using the undiluted product, and so there may be a requirement to use a face shield, as we see here. The sanitizer label that we just consulted required the use of chemical-resistant coveralls over a long-sleeve shirt and long pants, the use of chemical-resistant gloves, non-absorbent footwear, and also a face shield or goggles. So let's go ahead and don our protective equipment. We'll first start by putting on the chemical-resistant coveralls. We'll next put on our chemical-resistant boots. There's also a requirement to wear socks. Make sure that the cuffs of the coveralls go over the boots. We'll place our face shield in front of our eyes, and then we'll don our chemical-resistant gloves. We now have in place all of the personal protective equipment that is needed to comply with the label. But most importantly, we now have the protective equipment on that will keep us safe when using the sanitizer in its undiluted form. An important part of effectively using sanitizers is to mix the sanitizing solution to the proper concentration. The first step is to make sure that the sanitizer is current. Over time, sanitizers will lose effectiveness, and part of the record keeping of using sanitizers is to log the purchase date. Secondly, you need to have on hand some way of measuring the concentration of the finished sanitizing solution. This could be a test kit or it could be a test strip. Make sure that the test kit and the test strips are also current because they too lose effectiveness over time. The concentration of the sanitizing solution is described in terms of parts per million, and it's very important to carefully measure both the volume of the water used to make the solution and the volume of the sanitizer that will be added to the water. Make sure that the water is potable in all cases, and make sure that you follow the label. The label will include directions or instructions on how to mix up a sanitizing solution of the proper concentration to accomplish the desired purpose. Now let's take a look at the process. We have a bucket of potable water here, and we're going to go ahead and add our pre-measured sanitizer to that water. We will then mix the solution to thoroughly distribute the sanitizer. And if we follow the label carefully, if our sanitizer is current and we've carefully measured it, we should have a solution of the proper strength. But we don't really know that until we validate that with either a test or a test strip. So let's go ahead and take a test strip and check the concentration of the solution. We notice there's a color change, and we will compare that with the scale on the test strip bottle. Our goal was a solution between 100 and 200 parts per million, and we have reached that goal according to the test strip. It's important to test the concentration of the sanitizing solution as you mix up the batch, and that's what we have just done. But it's also important to monitor the concentration of the sanitizing solution over time, because over time sanitizers tend to lose effectiveness when in solution. So certainly test the concentration when you begin to use that batch of solution, but also test it at the end and periodically during the course of time over which that solution is being used. If using sanitizers, it's important to keep appropriate records. First of all, you should keep on hand information about the sanitizers that you plan to use. These could include technical data sheets, safety data sheets, and labels. It's also important to log the purchase date of sanitizers and also the test kits or the strips that are used to monitor the concentration of sanitizing solutions. And then as sanitizers are used, it's important to keep a cleaning and sanitizing log. And on that log, you want to note the date of use, the surface, the tool or the equipment on which it was used. In this case, it was tables and harvest buckets. Clean and sanitized, both. And we note here that we have a standard operating procedure in place to govern the use of sanitizers. So C, SOP. And again, we wash with detergent and brushes. We then sanitized with chlorine at 100 to 200 ppm. Important to initial all records, and then these records will be periodically reviewed by the person in charge of produce food safety on the farm.